some other cool things that have been happening in this offseason are the fact that there are some trades that are happening, or just general player acquisitions that are
Right.
happening, re-signings that are happening. Those are also big deals too for clubs in NWSL as they're preparing for the season ahead of them. But we got to talk about Washington Spirit and one of the moves that they just announced for their club.
Finally, it's about time Washington Spirit makes a move, because everything that we've been talking about, we know Gotham's been in the headlines a lot. North Carolina has also made some acquisitions, most recently Kansas City, San Diego, and Washington is a team and a roster that has looked a little small, right? There's not been a lot of players on there. So it was just recently announced that Gabrielle Carle, a Canadian international who spent last year in Sweden, has signed with the Washington Spirit. It's a 2-year contract with another option on the end of that. So she's a new professional. She spent 1 season in Sweden last year, but she plays on the Canadian international side of things. So she has a lot of international experience. She was at the World Cup in 2019 in France with Canada. She's got 35 international appearances. She's won a couple of medals. So she has a lot of experience. She's a defender. She does play a little bit higher up in the midfield sometimes, but she's mostly a defender. So I imagine we'll see her slot into that back line. It's almost a like for like swap out for Kelly O'Hara in that sense, with the international experience, what she can bring to the table. I'm not entirely sure where we'll see her across that back line, though, with Washington and kind of how they roll out, because there's still a lot of question marks on their roster. But this is a really big grab for them to get an international player. But you also have to be aware that this is a World Cup year. So how much are we actually going to see this player play? Because I imagine that Carl will be with Canada's national team heading to the World Cup. But this is a huge grab, and she's in Washington for a couple years, 2-year contract with another option on the end of it.
I think when we're looking at some of the clubs that we've been kind of fixated on, I guess, during this off season, Washington Spirit maybe hasn't been involved in some of that chatter. We've been talking a lot about some of the moves that Gotham FC has been making, because they've been making, some pretty good signings in the free agency period. We got to see Abby Smith and Kelly O'Hara kind of like, and oh my gosh, I'm forgetting, it's got Kristen Edmonds as well, who's showing up to Gotham and make the option for free agency. So we've been talking about them a lot, right? But we've also been talking recently about the Current. We've also been talking about Chicago and what that's meant for them, because they've had a number of players exercise their free agency. So it was cool to sort of see this kind of drop in, and just sort of see it as something like an acquisition, like a bit of acquisition for the Spirit, because there are clubs that we haven't been able to chat about a little bit during this off-season period. Now we can talk about a good move like this. And it's also, we were talking a lot about Chicago Red Stars and how this is a club that had a ton of players on the free agency list, how it was going to be a very, very tall order to try to, re-sign all 7 of them. They've re-signed Nagasato and Aaron Wright, have bid farewell to Morgan Gautreau, Vanessa DiBernardo, Danny Colaprico, Rachel Hill. But they also announced a re-signing of their own. They announced a re-signing for Tatum Milazzo. She is going to be extended. She's going to be with the club through 2024. And I think in terms of player news for the Red Stars, I think this is something else that they want to try to point to and say, like, hey, here's a player that we're going to retain, that we're going to have with us for the next couple of seasons. Candidate for Defender of the Year, someone who made I believe it was the best second 11 for Chicago Red Stars this year, someone who really didn't have a sophomore slump, right? We saw Tatum Milazzo really kind of slot in during her rookie year for the Red Stars in 2021, and kind of grow up very, very quickly out on the flank, and then saw her go through her second year and really, really put up some really good performances. So she's going to be, with the team for a couple years, and I'm sure that that's something that the club's excited about, that they were able to get done.
Yeah, that's definitely a huge grab for Chicago to keep a player like that. I mean, she's done tremendously, right? Like she grew so much last year, and to have a little bit more stability across that back line is good. So like these are the types of moves and trades that are really fun to key in on, because a player like Milazzo to be able to stay in Chicago and grow on what she's done, fantastic. And I love that for her. I love that for Chicago as well, to have a little bit of stability. One more thing about Gabby Clark that I think is a little bit interesting to just touch on at this point, because the soccer world is incredibly small, right? We know that. We all know that. So Mark Kerkorian, who is the current general manager of the Washington Spirit, he's the former Florida State head coach. And Gabby played at Florida State, won 2 national championships there, and now she's back at Washington. So I think that it's just kind of interesting to see how like full circle works, and how incredibly small that this sports world is of women's soccer. So Mark Kerkorian, former head coach of FSU, where Gabby played, and now Gabby has signed with Washington Spirit, where he is the GM.
Yeah, I think, look, it's while we weren't had a whole lot to speak about in terms of player movement for the Spirit as of right now in this window of time, they've been doing some things in terms of their supporting staff, obviously their head coaching staff, right, in announcing that Mark Parsons was going to lead the head coach, the team as head coach. And those are also big moves as well. Maybe they're not like that big player signing acquisition that fans are looking for right away, but those are like those steps that you make in order to continue to have a good pitch, for players, and to be able to recruit and retain them. And having somebody like Kirkern involved as club president is massive for them, right? Because of his connection to the sport and all of the players that have sort of come out of such a huge program in Florida State. So I would anticipate that
successful program, right? Like that's how you get a player like that, right? You have some type of connection, and you say, hey, we're going to make this worth your while to come to the United States, to the NWSL and play.
Yeah, I would anticipate that there's players who already maybe even have that on their radar, like, hey, Kirkern's with the Spirit, like how could I get in with this Spirit? Like that's how that happens. That's how that stuff kind of works. Sometimes behind the scenes, that sometimes that's all it takes. Having someone in a position that has good relationships with players, playing right now at the collegiate level, but also who have come out of that and are maybe finding themselves in a phase of their pro career where they're perhaps in Europe and they want to find themselves back playing stateside. So it's definitely something to keep an eye on for the Spirit. Let's see if those connections can continue to bloom and blossom for the Spirit, for sure. Look, lots of re-signings. I think Orlando Pride's another one of those clubs that we were looking at in terms of, are they going to be able to nab somebody off of that free agency list? But we've seen and heard some re-signings for them. They've also re-signed Carrie Lawrence, Viviana Villacorta. They've extended her as well. Erica Timrak has agreed to a 2-year contract with the Pride as well. So players that have found themselves already with this franchise have kind of taken some of their first steps as professional players, and also a veteran like Timrak, able to ensure that you have her coming back. I think that is really, really huge. You're going to need that good mix. I think if you're finding yourself in the midst of a rebuild, you've got to have that combination of young talent that you can sort of pitch on a rebuild, and you've got to have a couple bit of veteran pieces who will also want to buy into that as well. So good on the Pride for that one. So I mean, we're gonna continue to keep an eye on not just only like the big free agency moves, but any of the re-signings I think are really, really interesting for certain clubs as well. Because I know, like for OL Reign, similar to Chicago, we're like, hey, like there's some pieces here that we would have thought that maybe we would have heard something about already, whether it's somebody like a Lauren Barnes or a Megan Rapinoe. But in this area of free agency, we've just heard some re-signings. So we obviously, Quinn was the biggest of those in October, but throughout these last couple months, somebody like Sam Hyatt, Marley Carnelis is someone that they just recently inked as well. They said, hey, let's get you in for another year as well. Only had a few appearances for the Reign in 2021. I think just maybe like 3 or 4 appearances, but 1 start. But there's enough there for Laura Harvey to say, let's ensure that we get another year with this player, to maybe ensure that they have got another body in the midfield in light of a World Cup year coming up. They're probably going to be missing some pieces, right? So little things like that, I think, are the things that I look forward to when it comes to an off season. Like, I know we're all excited about free agency. It's the first time it's ever existed in an off season. So that, and it's delivered, I think, to up to this point. It's been very exciting. But I think all those little, like, those signings in between the big things like free agencies or big acquisitions, I think, are also very, very important to pay attention to
that's what rounds out a team, right? The players that are returning, whether they're spent their first rookie year with the club, and now they decide they want to come back and the club also wants them, or if it's a veteran, like, that's what fills the holes of a team. And that's what allows you to get more players, right? If you can say, hey, we've re-signed X number of players and these are the ones they're going to stay, so you get an idea of what the team is likely to look like, you're more able to get young players out of the draft or different trades or other free agents and say, hey, look what we're already building here. It is incredibly crucial.
Yeah, pay attention to those depth signings. That's what we'll refer to them as. Take a look at that. Before we cut out for a break, listen. We gotta celebrate some things here as well. Okay, not keep it too somber. We also have to celebrate. Congratulations are in order to Mallory Pugh. Got married. Saw some cool photos come out over last weekend. Something else that was really cool, reporting out of People with all of the cool photos, was the menu in this. It was a really good menu, I guess, for the wedding. Like, that was of a particular note, like, that people were like quote tweeting. I saw it said, wow, look at all this cool food at the wedding.
Love a People exclusive, because we get to see all these incredible photos. Congrats to Mallory Pugh, Dansby Swanson, her now husband, MLB player who's with the Atlanta Braves. I actually think he's a free agent right now, but I don't know about that for sure. I know that Philadelphia Phillies were looking at him. They passed on him. We're not getting him. But yeah, this is huge for Mallory. So exciting. We knew they were engaged, and I just love off-season wedding. Sandra, when you and I have talked to so many players, whether it's at the end of the season or at the beginning of the preseason, we're always like, hey, how was your off-season? And so many of them are like, it was filled with weddings, because these athletes, they can't get married in season. You don't have any time to do that, let alone plan a wedding. So they do it in the off season. So this is just one of the big ones that have been happening. Yeah, she looks stunning. They look so happy. And thank you, People, for the exclusive, for all the photos to look at it, some videos that I saw floating around on Instagram. It was stunning. Huge congrats to Mallory and Dansby.